everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and we are back. No, that's not right. I remembered the password to the Elestrals account again. Today we're going to talk specifically about some stuff that I was wrong about. And I know that that's surprising because I'm so infrequently wrong about anything. I just wrapped about 11 hours of casting with the Law, Yu-Gi-Oh! And K-Cray on today's webcam Elestrals tournament, and I gotta say it was a ton of fun, but it really highlighted that over the course of the last spoiler season, I made a couple of claims that I probably can't stand by any longer. Some cards I thought were going to be really strong, some cards I thought were going to be really weak, and sometimes I got those two confused, mixed up, and altogether just completely batshit off the wall incorrect. Just very wrong. So today I want to talk about those. The cards that I got absolutely, wholly, and unequivocally wrong, and let's begin with Morphrost. So I went to A-Drives a couple of months ago. We made a few videos where we spun a wheel and then we played Elestrals against each other. And one of the videos we made, he showed me a significant amount of the cards that are coming out in Moonrise and asked me to try and evaluate them. I imagine that video is going to go up eventually. It's not up yet. It's kind of strange. You can't publish it to generate hype for Moonrise because it spoils too many cards, and you can't really publish it afterwards because there's no reason to. I've reevaluated my stance on all those cards. It just sort of ended up in limbo. But one of the cards in that video I dismissed outright was Morphrost Scorpion Form. And can you really blame me? Morphrost Scorpion Form is a very interesting card. It's got a little going for it. On cast, you can discard a Morphrost to target an opponent's Elestral, set its base defense to 0, and during the end phase, you can expend 2 Frosts in order to destroy that Elestral. That's the same spirit differential and card economy that you get for activating Poison-Tipped Arrow, and it's proactive instead of reactive. So, is that good enough to be playable? Well, I thought the answer was no, and here's why. This card's only good if you are playing a critical mass of Morphrosts. Now, that critical mass can be less like 1 trillion and more like 6, but it still has to be enough that you can activate Morphrost Lichen Form's effect in order to search Scorpio Form and a card to discard. This card reads like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card insofar as it's a 1-card combo. You're meant to find Lichen Form, discard Lichen Form, add Bat and Scorpio Form, summon the Scorpio Form, and discard the Bat to take an opponent's Celestial down to 0, then summon back the Lichen Form. You can contest that 0 defense Celestial with your 2 cards, which is kind of hard for an opponent to play through. Single Gorgons or a Shield of Achilles isn't going to do it. It's got to be Tsunami, and if you don't connect, you can always just trigger the effect of the Scorpio Form at end step and get rid of it anyway. But because Morphrost was such a bad deck, I really didn't think it was going to be worth it. You gotta understand, Morphrost has had a really strange life cycle. At the first print of these cards in Frostfall, everybody thought they were going to be the only thing worth playing until they were inevitably banned. After 2 weeks of brewing, it became clear that that's not remotely true, that the Morphrosts were all hype, too much gas without anywhere to go. And as we all know, the way that Frostfall shook out, the best thing to be playing was the Earth deck with Thunder cards in it, until they banned parts of that, and then it became 5s. Morphrosts were never even really part of the equation. So when I was shown a card that gives a little more utility to a deck that's terrible, but not so much utility that the deck can now compete with other metagame relevant decks, I was a little wrong. It turns out, more important than Morphrost Scorpio Form's ability to discard a Bat on turn 1 and bring back a Lichen Form, this card is really good at making a board that ends up wide. Prior to Moonrise, a lot of the best decks were just trying to play a spirit-efficient Elestral every single turn and contested their opponent's spirit-efficient Elestral. There wasn't really a capacity for any deck to go wide unless they were way ahead, and if you did that, it was just a foregone conclusion. You were already going to win. Morphrost is kind of the first deck that has the ability to do that. It's also got some incidental synergy with another card that was kind of looking for a home, Morolith. By activating the effect of Lichen Form, you could put your Morolith online turn 1, something that the Snowmen deck that was popular at release of this card was already doing, but you could also mill a bunch of Morphrosts, and then your Bat doesn't have to bring back a terrible Lichen Form, it can bring back a negate in Terror. Now I want to temper your expectations here. This deck is only okay. Bean Soldier used it to win the inaugural Poison Nectar Monthly, and that was cool. That was really awesome, but it hasn't really seen success since. That said, it's nowhere near as bad as the bargain bin basement piece of garbage that I thought it was. Next up is Windjinn. I thought this card was not playable in any capacity, and it's not hard to see why. With Windjinn, you call a card, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck. If you get it right, you can not only add the card to your hand, but also ascend into Tornagin from your deck, which adds an additional card from your deck to your hand, chosen randomly between a 3-of package. Now, to be clear, I understood that Windjinn was able to consistently proc its effect. I just didn't think that was very good. There's a lot of reasons to think Tornadgen sucks. It's got a really low defense stat in a format where people are maining Cryoblast. It can't guarantee anything as of yet. If you want heal, you have to go like Kothmel, Ambro, a third card that you hope they don't pick. Back row runes don't always stop an opponent from attacking, which means that there's no guarantee that he's going to live. And God forbid you need removal in a format with only 2 removal spells. No, the thing that I got wrong about Windjinn was just how frequently it was going to be able to trigger its effect. I figured there was going to be a strategy in which this was the payoff. You would jump through a whole bunch of hoops in order to set up a Windjinn into Tornadgen, and try to win the game from that position. Since it doesn't win the game, I thought the deck was bad. But no, Windjinn just slots pretty nicely into a bunch of existing strategies. Most importantly, Solar. Solar has a ton of ways to manipulate the top of the deck, including Apollo, which gives you knowledge of the top cards of your deck, including First Light, which not only gives you knowledge of the top card of your deck, it also enables you to search any card in your deck because you're going to be calling and then adding it off of Windjinn, and also allows you to rank up on a Cockaray, which plays really nicely with a deck that's already on First Light. This Solar Cockaray Windjinn deck was the backbone of a strategy that just got top 8 in the most recent webcam event, so I think I can say without any hesitation that this card is way better than I gave it credit for. The Suppress guys. Boy, I was wrong about these. So when I talk about the Suppress guys, I'm talking about an entire class of card. I'm talking about Toxiri, I'm talking about Night Venom, and importantly, I'm also talking about Necrolith. So I just sort of assumed these cards were going to be really good. And, you know, it's not hard to see why. Necrolith is just Necrotol. Even if you don't get to cast him for his Lith effect, you can always just rank up onto an existing guy and pop something. Sure, it's hard to guarantee that all of your opponent's cards are going to be suppressed and therefore he can be cast, but you can guarantee something's going to be suppressed with Artemis. And Artemis is searchable by Fawnlet, and people are trying Posthumous, so it seems like a pretty easy fit into those strategies. And finally, Galaxea was just everywhere. A deck playing Dense Fog does get a bunch of free wins by just activating it on attack deck. Not so much, it turns out. While I was happy this weekend to see a Necrolith cast in Top Cut, one was registered in one of the top decks, it was not really everywhere. There's a lot of reasons for this. Toxiri searches Dense Fog, and Night Venom wants you to use the Dense Fog as a removal spell, but getting into the Night Venom is really difficult because there's no way to cheat it out. You just have to actually use your normal cast on it, and those cards don't stay on the field very long. Artemis is a good card, but not great. There's not too much with a static effect that you want to get rid of. Instead, you care much more about, like, enters the battlefield effects like Eddy, and, importantly, Lunar's really good. These cards seem really strong if Dense Fog is really strong, but Dense Fog is really strong if Lunar isn't strong, and Lunar is strong. As a result, these guys have done hardly anything since their print. I expected them to be one of the more powerful series of cards released in Moonrise, and instead they've sort of been a wet fart that occasionally shows up around the edges of the metagame. Speaking of wet farts, let's talk about Enfornax. Enfornax is one of the very few cards that in the Caster's Corner card-by-card review for Moonrise, I just straight up skipped over. And I wasn't alone. I think everyone else in that call said, we don't want to deal with Enfornax. We don't think this card is reasonable. I'm not even going to read Bellowbee. It turns out we should have. I will preface this by saying Enfornax is not easy to cast. You do have to spend 2 turns getting it out, which at present is really, really hard in terms of a sell. But it's crazy. It turns out that getting into a position where you're even remotely ahead and then casting an Enfornax wins you the game on the spot and tempos your opponent out to such a degree that they cannot ever get back into it. This is hugely important in either decks that are always behind in tempo and would really like to have a card that equalizes the board state like Windbox, which loves playing Enfornax, or in decks like Fire Nexus, which have the ability to make huge swing turns that get you way ahead and then cap the whole thing off with a guy that just reads I win. Not a lot in the game can deal with this card. Not a lot can attack over this card. Not a lot can take 2 to the face over and over again while you continue to set cards, but your opponent can never get anything going because you're just gonna bounce it. This card's really good. The only thing that's preventing it from being played at present is that it kind of lacks a home. The decks that I mentioned, Fire Nexus and Windbox, are not fantastic. Fire Nexus is meta-relevant for sure, but at present doesn't really have room for a card like this. And finally, let's talk about a card that's not from Moonrise, Galaxea. I thought Galaxea was dead. Put yourself in my position here. Reveals for Moonrise come out. There's a series of cards that can search Dense Fog. There's a million ways to suppress critters. You are benefited from performing that suppression. Surely this means the guy who loses the game if he attacks and then is suppressed is no longer good, right? Right? Well, apparently not. Galaxea is still around. No, it's not as ubiquitous as it was in the previous format, but it still features heavily in a lot of really good decks. Brews of Lunar aggro frequently play this card because it's kind of a hassle to get rid of. It really screws up a bunch of Like a Void math because you want to put a water under the guy so he can't be tsunamied because he's only got 2 defense. But if you do that and they cast Galaxea, well, you just wasted like 4 spirits because they can just attack. Add to that the fact that Tsunami has been creeping back into lists in large numbers because there are fewer water Elestrals being played. Add to that the fact that yes, cards like Dense Fog are in the format, but no, they're not fantastic because people are playing Lunar. Add to that the fact that Lunar aggro just needs like one more guy. They just need one more guy, and if he's sort of kind of sticky or hard to get rid of in any sort of reasonable way, then that's good enough. I guess we're never getting rid of the Fail Whale. Now keep in mind that his number 1 enemy, Spectress, has become functionally a 3-of staple in everything, but this card is still good. So those are the top 5 cards I was absolutely wrong about. Did you think anything in Moonrise was going to be more or less powerful than it ended up being? Let me know in the comments section below. I look forward to reading your answers because I expect I will probably not be wrong about anything else in the future ever. Bye.